Why are the currents in this area so strong? Is it the coriolis effect, or are these tidal currents? In this part of the world, the currents are notorious, and the channel between the Indonesian Sunda Islands of Lombok and Sumbawa, which is where we are now, are no exception. In the northern part of this channel, they're running a gentle 3 to 4 knots, but we know of boats that have had to turn around because the currents were running faster than they could sail or motor. We're going to talk more about currents, both local and global, in a bit. But first, a gentle sail eastwards towards the sleeping giant that is Sumbawa.
We are now approaching the east side of Sumbawa. Sumbawa is a much bigger island compared to Lombok. I suppose you could call it like the sleeping giant of these chain of islands along the bottom of the Java Sea. Sleeping giant, of course, because I think it's on Sumbawa which had the biggest volcanic explosion known to man, which is on the east side. But it's a very, very busy port down here. I do not think I have ever seen so many ferries going backwards and forwards. It was quite a nice sail, actually. In fact, we're still sailing now. There was a little bit of current against us, so our heading was about 30 degrees off our course. So I'm just keeping an eye out because it's going to start getting shallow now. We're just approaching this single rock just here, which has a long, thin, shallow patch coming out from the south of it. It's just beautiful, it really is. So looking forward to tucking ourselves behind one of these islands. Down to 22 metres now, we were in 800. I think I'd better get back to the helm. Well, that was a really nice little sail across, especially considering we had all those counter currents. When we left, trying to weigh anchor was fun and games, but we got out and we slowly motored down the side of the island, and then once we'd sort of aimed towards this direction, got the sails out, and yeah, it was really quite gentle. So this is the island of Kenawa. This one just here, it's got the big peak on it. And the reason why we are here is because this was recommended to us by a local lad who worked at High Dive Resort on the east side of Giligedi. We bumped into him in his village and we just got chatting, and he said that he likes coming here. He brings his scooter across from the east side of Lombok on one of the many hundreds of ferries running across all the day, and leaves his bike at port there, gets a little boat over to the jetty just over my right shoulder, and walks up to the top of the hill. So what we're going to do is probably tomorrow we'll do that ourselves, and we're going to send him a picture to say thank you for the recommendation. Right, good morning. We've just had a little coffee. Unfortunately, it was just a packet coffee. It's like a warm milkshake, really, coffee flavoured milkshake. So we've just come ashore, and all the tourists have gone already. So we see a lot of tourist boats. They're like crossing a dive boat and a panisi, packed full of tourists. They come here, they climb that mound there to catch the sunset, and then they bugger off first thing in the morning and go on to the next destination. Obviously we're taking it a bit more slowly. Right now you can see I'm walking through a field of very nice grass that people would pay a lot of money for to put in their gardens back in the UK. Liz has gone round the other way. Her latest obsession is shells. She has become fanatical about them. She's collecting lots of shells, and she's a member of a couple of groups on Facebook to identify the shells. So she's taking it seriously, and she's getting to know her shells very well. I think the idea is to start making displays out of them. When you walk with her down the beach, she's sort of dawdling along at half a mile an hour. You never get anything done, you don't see anything except the seashore. So just burning up in this morning heat. Just through there you can see Esper. What a stunning view, eh? 360 degree view, and you can see Esper just over there. You can even see our dinghy anchored in the water. And over in the west, of course, is Lombok. Last night, after the sun set, there was what appeared to be a huge, massive black cloud over the top of Lombok. Checked the weather radar and there was nothing there, and I realised it was just the effect of the sun dropping behind this huge volcano and how much light it loses once it does that. It looked quite ominous, but last night, no rain, very, very quiet, no mosques, no fishing boats. It was very, very peaceful here.
Ocean currents are driven by three factors: gravity, water density, and the wind. They're continuous and predictable, move either horizontally or vertically, and influence climate and weather patterns around the world. As global winds drag on the water's surface, the water builds up and moves in the direction of the wind. In the northern hemisphere, wind is deflected to the right, and in the southern hemisphere, it's deflected to the left. This pattern of deflection along with the Earth's rotation is called the coriolis effect. There are 5 major spirals of ocean circling currents, also called gyres, occurring both north and south of, but not on, the equator. Perhaps the most famous current is the Gulf Stream, also called the North Atlantic Drift. This begins in the Gulf of Mexico, passes through Florida, follows the eastern side of the US, and then extends towards Europe. It's responsible for the warm climates in these areas. Sailors have been taking advantage of steady ocean currents and wind for millennia. Since these change throughout the year, there are well-defined times in which to make ocean passages. For example, in February this year, shortly after we dropped into the water after our haul-out, a passage northwest through the Java Sea would have been difficult. With the winds blowing from the west across the Flores Sea, a journey eastwards would be more desirable, but a journey northwest would almost certainly have been difficult. Not only would we have been sailing into wind, but the currents would have been counter too. For much of the time, the currents are running from west to east in this area, but during the summer months, when the winds are blowing from the southeast, the currents switch, making a passage through the Java Sea quick and lively. Of course, if you miss a weather window to travel in a certain direction, you have 2 options. Head into a challenging sea for an uncomfortable, even dangerous passage, or sit and wait until the next one comes around. Since these are seasonal, you could be waiting for 9 months. But while global patterns are predictable, local currents across the Sunda Islands are less so.
Behind me you can see the morning sun on Mount Rinjani over on Lombok, and we've just left the little island of Kenawa and we're going up this channel to go around the top of the northwest corner of Sumbawa. There's a lot of currents around here. You may have noticed when we were at anchor the amount of currents around us, whipping around us, so I just wanted to get out of that anchorage while we were pointing in the right direction. However, as we've come around the corner of Kenawa, the currents are now against us. Now, Windy has a feature where you can look at the currents, and it's pretty spot on actually, and it's showing 3+ knots of current against us up until we get to this little island just over there, which you probably can't see because it's a bit sunny, and once we get beyond that, then hopefully the currents will abate a little and we'll be back up to speed. But as it is, we're back down to 2.5 knots. We're almost tempted to drop the hook and wait an hour for it to turn. Well, you only have to look at the snubber in the water now that Liz has put the anchor down to see how fast that water's running. It's probably a good 2.5 knots, I should think. So we are literally just off this island here, and we've just dumped 50 metres. We're in 26 metres, but I figured we'd just dump 50 just to sort of vaguely hold us in this spot where we will sit until the currents turn in about an hour or so's time.
The Lesser Sunda Islands are part of the Malay archipelago. Volcanic in origin, most still active, they stretch east from Bali through many islands including Lombok, Sumbawa, Komodo and Flores to Witar. The Greater Sunda Islands are also part of the archipelago and include Sumatra, Sulawesi, Borneo and Java. You can't talk about currents in this area without mentioning the Indonesian Throughflow, or ITF for short. This is the monstrous amount of water continually pushing from the Pacific through Indonesia's islands into the Indian Ocean. It affects the whole country to varying degrees, but here in the Lesser Sundas, it combines with tides, monsoons and local anomalies to create huge and sometimes confusing currents. The bathymetry of this string of islands has a major effect on currents. If you're not familiar with the word bathymetry, it's the study of landforms below sea level, a bit like topography, but underwater. The bathymetric map here is incredibly complex, showing deep trenches, troughs and basins to the north and south of the archipelago. The ITF weaves its way around this underwater landscape, creating upswells, eddies and downdrafts. And those deep Pacific Ocean waters entangle with surface waters before being spewed out into the Indian Ocean. When you add in the tides, currents and trade winds, all of which affect local currents, you have an extraordinary recipe for unpredictable and challenging conditions. The ITF is strongest during the middle of the southeast monsoon, June, July, August, when currents have been known to reach 10 knots. Keeping a continual check on the state of the sea's surface around you and using local knowledge when possible can save an unrewarding sail uphill against impossible currents.
And we're off again. Just had a little wait for 1 hour. There's still a little bit of a current against us, but it's going to be turning in the next hour or so. And there is actually a cut-off point after this island here. That's where it stops being so strong. So yeah, about half an hour we should be back on track. So at the moment we're still just doing just under 4 knots. Should be doing a good 5.
That last anchorage was lovely. A very pretty island. We climbed to the top of the peak. It was very rubbly and shaly, and my dive boots weren't the best thing to do it in. I did slip and slide, but what an incredible view from the top. Yeah, lovely island, nice people again in the warung there. We had a cup of tea or coffee, I can't remember now. So off today, this morning we left very early and the current was way too much. So I think Jamie's already explained, we decided just to drop the anchor for a couple of hours to wait for that current to die down, which it has. And now we're continuing on. We've got about 16 miles to go to our preferred anchorage. Sure exactly what's going on up there, but everything that Windy is telling us, it looks good. It looks like there shouldn't be current and there shouldn't be wind, maybe a little touch of wind in the afternoon. But once again, absolutely flat. Tiny bit of wind, but not really. We're just making our own wind, so we are properly motoring along this flat area. Quite enjoying it. It's nice out here when you've got the wind on your face, but inside, oh, it's bloody hot.
By the way, we are now back up to 4.3 knots, speed over ground, and this pretty much coincides with exactly the point that I was talking about earlier that Windy shows you. So I really do recommend using this feature on Windy under currents. You've got tidal currents and then you've got sort of more generic currents, and you can see quite clearly the marks where the current is 3 knots versus 2 knots versus 1 knot, and of course the direction as well. And it's been absolutely spot on. So quite useful to know not to try and motor through 2-3 knots of current and drop the hook instead and wait for this now to turn. in front of me, and to the north, clear blue skies, and behind me in the south, huge storm brewing. This is normal, in fact you can probably hear the thunder now. We're just coming out the top though, so I'm hoping we get to avoid most of this. There's a very shallow patch there, 1 metre, which I can see clearly, and you've got this funny desert island just here. It's just the perfect desert island with a reef around it. So we're just working our way through there. A little bit of current against us again, but we'll just keep chugging along, go around the top, and then we're going to find our little home for the night, hopefully without getting wet. Where are we, Elizabeth?
We're in Devon. Southwest England, we're in Devon. That's what it looks like.
Yep, so we're approaching our anchorage, which is around a sharp 90-degree bend, and it's supposed to be quite intimidating looking, but fairly straightforward. It's very narrow, but as Liz says, this countryside here could almost be England. Well, I think that was one of the tightest entrances to Mrs. Tightest entrance. 30 metres wide apparently at the narrowest point, but we come into this beautiful little fjord-like bay, complete protection. It's very quiet, apart from a couple of fishermen screaming and shouting, getting all excited when we turned up. Came straight over while we were still laying down the anchor, trying to sell us crab, but we politely declined, and they got the message. Instead they're laying out their net behind me. Internet isn't great here, and we've got to do some internet based stuff, but I said to Liz, look, let's just enjoy this for what it is. It's a great little spot. We've got the sea out there, and then through there, that's the mainland. You can see that big cloud we were seeing earlier. That's all of that down there. Hopefully it will stay down there, and we can then just enjoy the sounds of nature.